Welcome back to our series on implementation. Today we're talking with our friend Liz O'Connor, founder and principal of Strategy Matters. Liz and her team specialize in helping mission-based organizations create strategic plans and move them into action. And they've been using a very specific framework to help make sure that those plans don't gather dust. Today we're going to learn about that approach and why it's so important. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Time. I want to welcome our viewers and listeners in the United States, in Australia, and around the world. If you're joining us live, please drop us a note in the comments and let us know where you're joining us from. I want to introduce my colleague, Cynthia. Good morning, Cynthia.
Hi, Peta. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really, really good. Excited about today.
And I'm also going to bring into the studio our friend Liz. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us again.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Cynthia. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join both of you again.
Oh, thank you.
So, Liz, you and your team work with mission-based organizations, particularly around strategic planning. What do you see as some of the big obstacles in moving those plans into action?
There are so many. And as you posed this question, I thought about the most common. And I think the most common barrier to moving from a successful planning process to a successful implementation is one of two things. One is your plan is too big, which is to say it's big and aspirational and it is lacking specificity. So you don't know what to do with it. You know, we want to create a more just world or solve, poverty and hunger, and no one knows sort of where to begin. And the other version is that it's too small. And maybe you start with these big ideas and then work down to a tiny little spreadsheet with every action step mapped out and, dates and who's going to do it. And it's a spreadsheet that no one ever looks at except for on the day it's time to report on the implementation of the plan.
Yeah.
And that's the day we back up and scramble and say, oh my gosh, I didn't do that. And,
right.
So both of these things kind of miss the point about how most of us organize our time and figure out how to spend our day.
Yeah.
Because at the bottom of implementation is simply making some choices about what you're going to do with your day. And so how can a strategic plan, implementation plan, influence those choices is the question I think one has to ask when you're pivoting from planning to implementation.
I mean, this seems so obvious, but it is completely omitted from every planning process. So when I get to work tomorrow, what am I going to do that's different?
Right. Exactly. And I think there's another sort of process step that a lot of planning processes omit, which is if you've gone through a process and laid out a bunch of things that you want to do that you've never done before, unless you were only working, say, at 10 or 20% of your capacity,
right,
you don't have time to do all those things starting now. So you're going to have to get rid of some of the old stuff or integrate the new stuff into what you're already doing. And those are really the only two choices if you were already occupied full time, which most of us are.
And we are all occupied full time, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's not it's not just I don't specifically know what I'm supposed to do tomorrow that's different. It's also like I've already got an entire day worth of tasks and responsibility tomorrow, and I'm not even going to sit here and think about it. Right? I'm just going to get to work.
Right. And often that strategic plan, I think another implementation problem, which is related to some of these, is somebody's understanding of what that plan is there to do. So in the event that an organization has a plan and the staff thinks, well, that's just a plan because the board made us do it, or the funders want to have it, or we had to check that box, but it doesn't really mean anything for me. That's not even
every 5 years. So we've done it.
Yeah, right. So, it's really easy to ignore in that case. It's like, it's not even a meaningful document. So But even the ones that are widely understood to be meaningful and important can sometimes get lost in the shuffle if implementation isn't built in at the very beginning as a priority. The plan has to be built to be able to be implemented, I think.
Mhm. So how do you do that? Your organization uses a very specific approach. And tell us about that.
Sure. And I want to start out by saying we use it and it's not ours. It's from the Covey companies. It's called the 4 Disciplines of Execution. I got it from a client, actually. I had a strategic planning client and he read this book and he called me like hysterical. Liz, you got to read this book. You're going to love this book. You'll never be the same. You'll never do anything the same. Now, this guy was a pretty enthusiastic guy in general, and he was frequently using this kind of excitable voice. But in this particular case, he also said the same thing about Twitter, which he was wrong on Twitter. He's like, convinced I would love Twitter. I don't love Twitter. I do love the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And the reason I love it is it actually solves all of those problems I just mentioned. Yep, there you go. That's the Bible of implementation. And important to note that this book was written not by somebody sort of divining a strategy for how to implement, but rather they studied implementation in different contexts. And what they did was looked around at organizations and said, who's good at implementing plans and who's not? And of those who are good at the implementation, what are they doing? And they found only 4 things in common. So as a facilitator, some of you out there probably use a similar method. It's often referred to as appreciative inquiry, and looking at sort of when things are working, what's happening, and let's do more of that. So they used an appreciative inquiry approach, and they learned about these 4 disciplines, and they're quite simple. And the beauty, in my mind, of the 4 disciplines is that you actually don't need to write down everything you're going to do in your plan. You need to make some commitments and have some priorities, and then everyone can organize themselves around those priorities. So it probably makes sense to explain what the 4 disciplines are and how they work.
Yes, I'll have to get out my copy of the book to remember what they are. I remember the last one, a cadence of accountability. That's obviously my favorite.
Right. And also the word cadence is just fun to say. But the first discipline is maybe, they're all important, but the first one is identify your wildly important goals.
Yep.
Yes.
And so the wildly important goals, the way I've come to put a shorthand on that is those are the things that if you cannot accomplish them in your organization, you should shut it down and do something else. So, if you're a restaurant serving delicious, high quality food that people will buy, if you can't do that, you don't have a restaurant. So that is your wildly important goal. Yeah. For we use this at Strategy Matters. For us, we have 2. Do great client work and run a successful, great company. And by great, I mean pay people well, have people be happy here. Great means a lot of things. But all I really want to do is great client work and run a great company. And if I can do those 2 things, if we as a community here can do those 2 things, it's worth doing. The day we can't do one of those things is the day I should hang up, close the door and go home and find a job as a waiter somewhere, because restaurants are doing the wildly important.
For reference, Liz has actually been a server.
Many years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of it as.
And I hear she was the world's worst server.
Yeah, but the source is biased. So is my husband. I made a ton of money as a server. I don't know what he's talking about. So.
I love that.
Actually, I do know what he was talking about. He was the cook in the kitchen where I was the server, and he didn't like how long I would leave the pasta dishes under the heat lamp. So, in any event, but I think, so we have to do great client work and run a great company. And then, our clients, for example, one of our clients is a transit authority. And what do they have to do? They have to run safe, reliable transportation, period. And if they can't do that, they should not be in that business. So that's like what wildly important goals are. They're not, wildly important goals are also different from like your goals in your strategic plan. They're not, those are your annual goals. They might change over time, but your wildly important goals, that's what you're about. It's your core purpose as an organization. And the second discipline is to have a very public facing dashboard and scoreboard of data. So these are more commonly referred to as key performance indicators or leading and lagging indicators of success. Yeah, Cynthia, go ahead.
No, I was agreeing. KPIs, yes.
Oh yeah. And we like to, the 4 disciplines requires that you think about them have 2 different types. One is leading indicators of your success, and the other is lagging. So the way to think about this is some data tells you that you're on the right track to accomplish something, and some data tells you that you already have in the past accomplished it. So when I say I want to do great client work, right? One leading indicator of doing great client work is that I understand clearly what my clients are asking me to do. So I can't do great client work if we have miscommunication, but I know that if we have strong communication, my chances of being able to formulate our consulting work to their needs are high. So that would be a leading indicator of success.
And let's talk a little bit about like why I think that one is so important.
Mhm.
There's, we've talked about, we set these really lofty goals and we talk about where the organization is going to be at the end of the year or at the end of 5 years, but we don't know what we're supposed to be doing right now.
Mhm.
Those leading indicators ideally are so small that it's like, did I do that thing this week? And it's so clearly defined that I can check it off, right? Like the unit of measure should be check mark or not, right?
Yeah.
If it's wishy-washy, you're probably not doing it, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
Right.
did I make 6 phone calls? Like, did I, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like fundraisers know this, right? You need, 12 non-asks every year in addition to your asks.
Yeah.
So that would be a leading indicator of success as a fundraiser, is actually just having done those 12 touch points or contacts without asking for money. I think fundraisers actually are very good at leading indicators of success because they know if I do X, Y, and Z today, in a year, I will get a gift. And getting the gift is the lagging indicator of success. So we think of that in this framework as your dashboard. Those are your leading indicators, and your scoreboard. So and at Strategy Matters, our dashboard includes things like how many of our clients' projects are on time and on budget. And that is a piece of data that's really helpful for a variety of reasons, right? Clients are happier when it's on time and on budget. So that's going to be great client work. Consultants are happier because their schedules are staying sane. Cash flow is better because we bill by milestones. So that one data point is telling me a whole lot about the health of the company and how I'm doing in relation to my wildly important goals. Just, one small data point. I don't need 15. One of my most important lagging indicators of success is my client return and referral rate. So that again will tell me a lot about how, nobody refers a consultant that they thought did bad work. So, if somebody gives someone else my name, generally that means they were satisfied enough to put their own social capital on the line to make the referral. And it also means it's good for business, right? I'm getting new business from that referral. So it's good for cash flow and it's good for morale because, my team knows that we've been recommended and that feels better than say going knocking on doors saying, could you please hire us? And we don't know you. So it's the
close rate's a lot higher.
Yeah. And so, and the next discipline of execution is act on the leading indicators. So what that means is when your data points are telling you that things are not going as you planned, do something differently. So if I were to find out, for example, that all my projects were on time and on budget, but my clients were still really unhappy, I would have to say, I'm using the wrong data. This is not telling me what I thought it was going to do. Or if I looked at we generally have 25 projects at a time. If I looked at my 25 projects and saw that half of them were off track and off budget, I would say, what's going on around here? Let's do something. Do we need to hire some more people? Do we need to change our timelines and renegotiate them with our clients? We have to do something because we can't have half of our projects off track and off budget because that's going to lead to other problems. So the minute we would see that our leading indicators were pointing to a problem, we would do something. And that's a discipline. Because ignoring it and waiting to see what happens is a disaster.
Yeah.
And that last one is Peter's favorite, the cadence of accountability. You have to have, and they're very strict in the book about this, and I've been very strict in my use of it. You have to have a meeting. The interval might vary, but a specific meeting where everybody looks at the same data, the dashboard and the scoreboard, and tries to figure out what it's telling us and what we need to do as a result, and then makes some commitments to move the data in the right direction. And the commitments have to be, as you said, Peter, like small enough to be done. So here at Strategy Matters, we do this once a week. It takes about 20 minutes and there's no other agenda items. This is very important. The idea is that you're only focused on those wildly important goals and how you're doing in relation to them. And then, so we talk about how many of our projects are off track or off budget. How are our clients feeling? How are our consultants feeling? For us, a big leading indicator of good work is happy consultants.
Happy.
Right? So when the team is happy, they're doing great work. So we spend 10 minutes a week asking how happy is everybody this week. And if somebody says, I'm really miserable, my mother is sick and my daughter is tired and, schools are closed from the pandemic and I'm really stressed out, we don't say, well, hurry up and get back to work because cash flow needs you. What we generally say is, how can we help? What's in your portfolio that we can take off your shoulders? And that becomes a commitment for the week. Somebody says, in service to client, consultant happiness, I'm going to take off some of Liz's work off of her shoulders. And so
this is an important part of what accountability means here. I think a lot of people react really negatively to the word accountability, and it's an opportunity to get in trouble. And that's not what you mean here, right? You mean be honest about the barriers that you're having in getting this accomplished, because we will help you. We're all accountable to getting this done. That's a very different kind of accountability.
Yes, that's right. And it's funny because one of our sort of perpetual problems around here is the difference in work styles. So we have 9 people. Some of them are really good with calendars and deadlines and appointments and timelines. And some of them, like myself, are not. And so, when I'm working on something, it tends to be a little chaotic. And my colleagues will say to me, this is a problem for me personally because it irritates me and it derails my own work, but it's also a problem for our client well-being because our clients don't know what to expect, when they're going to get what you told them they're going to get, or they don't know why you're taking them in this direction instead of that direction. And so someone can bring to me a challenge like that, and it can have multiple layers, and it helps me to see how to solve it, because I might not be able to solve my whole personality, but I can solve the part of it that's getting in the way of the work going smoothly, and I can see the reasoning for it. It takes it from like an interpersonal conflict to kind of the level of substance in our work together, and it's much more solvable there, I think.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I'm trying to think of an example, right? To really see this in action, the 4 disciplines, but I'm trying to think. So strategic plans are about creating pathways or creating clear direction moving forward. And oftentimes it does shake an organization up, right? And so there are new behaviors, there are new things to work on. And it could be too much, especially if you're adding or if you're also operational, just the day-to-day. So I think the 4 disciplines are great, and I love them too. But how do we focus on our wildly important goals when we also have to implement 3 new initiatives because we got federal funding, right? So
yeah, I mean, I think the trick is to make sure that, and honestly, this is a bit of a trick, is to make sure that the funding doesn't undermine and in fact supports your wildly important goals. And that's really easy to say. I'm not leading a nonprofit, and no federal agency has waved $5 million at me if I would only do what they want instead of what I know I need to do. So I'm aware of the complexity of that statement. However, if there isn't a way to make the grant funding support your wildly important goals, you're about to create a whole new set of problems that the money will not cover solving.
Yeah. And that's that is where a lot of mission creep comes from, right?
Yes.
But it's a very different way of thinking about funding.
It is. And I think, I mean, in another sort of line of advising, my advice to nonprofits often is don't be so certain that they won't listen to you if you tell them you want to do it a different way than they're telling you. If you can make your case, often they do have the flexibility, even government funders, and they don't often lead with I'm flexible, tell me how you want to do this. But if you say, we really do want to work with you, but here's how we need to do it for alignment and our strategic plan, there's a chance that they will let you do it.
Yes.
I mean, this is something that we've talked about on the show a lot and in a lot of different ways, is staying in your lane, right? Is focusing on your organization's strengths and not trying to do everything. In fact, focusing on effectively partnering with other organizations that might be better at doing a thing, rather than trying to expand your own operations to cover something that's not really your area of strength, right? The way I look at it is like, if we're all creating thriving communities, then there's a role for all of us. And the best way to support another mission-based organization in the field might be to direct funding to them rather than compete with them and take the funding if they're going to be more effective on it, right?
And to do that, you need to be clear on what your wildly important goals are and what they're not, right? So your wildly important goals in that case have something to do with creating thriving communities and not in being the biggest, most well-funded nonprofit.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I always thought that, the day that you say having more money is your goal, you have kind of lost your way, right?
Yeah, right.
It's not that you shouldn't have more money. You might need more money, and maybe you should have it.
More money might increase your ability to build thriving communities, but it's a means.
Exactly. Right. And so that's what the 4 disciplines will help you stay focused on. In fact, they have a word for all the things that you worry about that are not your wildly important goals, and they let the whirlwind. And so they don't let the whirlwind into the meetings that you have for your cadence of accountability are often referred to as your WIG meetings, your wildly important goal meetings. And you've got to keep the whirlwind out of your WIG meetings because it'll infect your ability to focus.
Yes.
So could an organization have too many goals? Is that what potentially happens? Because I work with a lot of organizations that are growing, and many of them are experiencing hyper growth. So real acute increase in either budgets or demand, and they're trying to build infrastructure. So they need an HR department, and they need a finance, or they need someone who knows finances, and they need a new line of leadership, right? And so this is all happening as the growth has also occurred. And so for some organizations, that's a really tough position to be in. It's a lot of change very fast. Could it be too much?
I think it probably is too much if it isn't subordinate to something else. So, what they probably are saying is, we want to be an organization that has the capacity to do the things that we've promised we're going to do. So maybe we got a $10 million Ford Foundation grant to create something in our community, and we need to really staff up and build our infrastructure in order to support that. So the wildly important goal in there is whatever Ford is funding you to do. And these are the leading indicators, if you will, of your ability to do that. And once you put it in that way, it can help clarify some decisions too. So if the leading indicator is something like, we have enough people working here to meet our responsibilities, that's not a number, but that is a question. So on a weekly basis, one might say, okay, are we able to do what we need to do? Oh, no, we're not. Okay, what are we missing? We don't have anybody to send out the invoices. Okay, well, is that something one of us can do, or is that something we need to hire for? But it's not a blanket, we need to hire administrative staff, because that's not an end in itself. We need the capacity to be the kind of a team that can do this work that we said we were going to do. And now let's have the conversation in that vein.
Right.
So that the answer is really a way of saying, here's how we're going to build the capacity to do the things we said we want to do.
Yeah.
This conversation is reminding me so much of, how I find myself avoiding the word goal because there's so much confusion about what a goal is, right? That a goal can be the WIG, right? A goal can be the vision, right?
Mhm.
What's it going to be like when we're done,
Mhm.
right? Or as I put it, what is the state of well-being in the world that
Mhm.
when we attain that, you all say, "Oh, we're done here. We can go home," right?
Yeah.
We're retiring
Right.
now, right? Versus what is a milestone, right?
Mm.
And that kind of thing really, it muddies the waters, right? So people get focused on, we're going to serve our 100th participant, or we're going to hire 12 administrative people, when that is a stepping stone, but it's not, right? It's not a central thing.
Right. And I think a good way to remind people of that is to say, like, when you leave work and you go off to a cocktail party and you're bragging about all of your accomplishments, are you going to be bragging that you hired 12 people or that the 100th person walked over your threshold today? Or is it something bigger and more meaningful than that? You
Yeah.
know? And I think, whatever you're going to be, you get a little closer to what matters when you think about what you are proud of at the end of the day.
I love that.
Mhm.
I love that. What matters is what
Yeah.
you're proud of.
I'm so glad that we're talking about this today, because it is the end of the quarter for me, and I need to do my planning and visioning for my business for the second half of the year. And I really needed to be reminded of articulating my wigs well and focusing
Yeah.
on the leading indicators.
What are you trying to accomplish? What are your big, most important goals?
More ease in my business.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So revenue with ease. Is one of my big goals. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, and I think we could take each of the disciplines and make them a show.
I think we could.
There definitely is a lot, and I'm always, wanting to know, well, let's look at examples and test this.
Yeah.
And I think we should do another series and just focus
Just on the 4 disciplines. Yeah. But there is so much, and there is the culture of, we're going to openly talk about these things and talk about them in context. I got a really interesting email this week from somebody who was thinking about the problem of KPIs, right? And when you focus on a KPI without context, and then you end up with an organization that sometimes does, they game, right?
Yeah.
Right? Let's make the KPI happen without actually doing any of what it's supposed to measure, right? And that's how you end up with a bank that invents bank accounts, right? Things like that, right? And I think that's part of another. I mean, we can have endless shows on where measures go wrong and the downsides of KPIs. But this is one useful way of thinking about how you cannot just talk about your KPI by itself, right? It has to be in the context of, what are we actually doing here, and why does it matter? And how did work focusing on this thing advance the mission of the organization? Right.
And I think, the best KPIs are the ones that don't allow for the cheating, right? Like, I think about in education, the one I always want in education is student engagement. Yeah. Student engagement is a tremendous indicator of success, right? I don't need their test scores. If they're engaged, I know they're learning, and their test scores will take care of themselves. But if the test scores are the KPI, then we get all sorts of perverse outcomes, like teachers cheating.
Yeah.
Especially because we're really good at making punishments for failing to meet the bar. And if you think about that, that's dragging everybody's attention away from what we know will actually work for learning, which is student engagement. Yeah. So it's the wrong measure can actually it's never neutral, right? It can do a lot of harm.
No, the wrong measure can do a lot of harm. And I think maybe this is something to talk about on another show, but I'm not even sure that there is a measure that is impervious to gaming, right? I think once it gets isolated, probably anything can get manipulated that way.
Right.
We'll talk about that on another show, because I've got
that's food for thought.
Yeah. Well, Liz, thank you so much for joining us again. This has been
thank you, Liz. That was awesome
conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to next time. Take care, guys.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good weekend, everybody.